Okay, good afternoon and a warm welcome for this next TED Talk that is hosted by the TEDS initiative at Center for Policy Research. For those of you, because I think uh, over the last few sessions of the TED Talks had dealt with one specific theme, that is water-centric urban planning in India. But now we are back to our core theme, which is on transboundary rivers primarily, not necessarily. I think this particular talk may not be perhaps about governance, transboundary governance. It is certainly about governance. So this talk is by Dr. Rahul Yaduka, who is a postdoctoral scholar at SOAS School of Law. But before I introduce him, I think a couple of things to on the housekeeping. One is that please try putting your questions on in the Q&A chat box, and then the way we want to go about is that we will at the end of the talk, our communications team would be forwarding these questions to my WhatsApp via WhatsApp to my phone. So if I look at WhatsApp and ask questions to Dr. Yadika, it is because of that. Other than that, I guess there are no other housekeeping. Right. Okay. So this talk is on Kosi River. This is transboundary river that is shared by India and Nepal. And I think considering the fact that the past few months, India, I think one of the in the forefront were that many, I think on all the fronts actually, the transboundary river governance challenge, one on Indus River, Indus Water Treaty related conversations, and then later with China on the super dam related conversations. I think if you look at it, the past few months have been about these transboundary river governance related challenges. In fact, it is going to be much more so about the transboundary river governances because the other side, the river, the Ganga River, was shared with Bangladesh. The Farakka agreement, which is between India and Bangladesh, is up for renewal. I think that will also become a part of this public discourse very soon, if not already. But we are also hoping that the TEDS team itself is hoping that we would organize certain events about it. So you can look out for any announcements about these likely conversations on these three fronts. But I think this one, particularly the relationship with Nepal over Kosi River, I think it's not only just the oldest and also very complex, if not equally complex, but certainly is one of the long-standing issues, and partly because I don't think the initial agreement between India and Nepal was about temporarily addressing that challenge of transboundary governance. So the Kosi barrage that we keep talking about in terms of when it comes to India-Nepal relationships, besides the hydropower related projects, it is actually a temporary arrangement. I have particular interest partly because this is one of those relationships that I've looked at a bit closely, and with certain amount of field work that I did in the trans boundary spaces between India and Nepal, and have some level of understanding about this relationship, transboundary relationships. But today, I think it is more about the politics of Kosi River related flood management, I think, from within India rather than about transboundary relationship. But it has direct implications partly because when it comes to flood related risks, it is the state government, the Bihar government, which is responsible for responding, even though it's in the larger framework of India-Nepal relationships. So it's likely to be a very exciting talk, partly because Rahul is someone who did his PhD on it, and he has been quite actively sharing his research in a variety of platforms. We are fortunate to have him partly because Professor Philip Kulle, who leads the project where he's postdoctoral studies, he's also someone who is associated with CPR as a senior visiting fellow. And many of you who have attended CPR events must have seen him talking as well as moderating some of those talks earlier. So because Philip is the lead on this project and Rahul is someone who shares interest with the TEDS initiatives, he has been spending some time here at CPR. And then we requested him if he could share his research at CPR. So that's how it ends up coming here. So a quick introduction to Rahul before I hand it over to him. Dr. Rahul Yaduka is a postdoctoral researcher at Soya School of Law, working with Professor Philip Coulet on the ERC UKRI funded WhatCon project. It's about water conflicts acronym that is turned into WhatCon project, addressing the multi-scalar dimensions of sectoral water conflicts through the lens of water security. Lessons from South Asia. Dr. Rayaduka's research investigates sectoral water conflicts, such as around dams in Uttarakhand used for irrigation, hydropower, and drinking water, exploring river rights for sustainable conflict resolution. He holds a PhD in development studies from Ambedkar University, Delhi, and MA in political science in the University of Delhi, and also a BTech in civil engineering from IIT Bombay. His doctoral work focused on community resistance to development and disaster management, exploring social, political aspects of disaster governance. He has published on the Kosi floods in Bihar from an anthropologist perspective and engages in collaborative research on environmental governance, amplifying marginalized voices through articles in Hindi, Maithili, and Nepali. Nepali as well. Was it translated or you write in Nepali? Okay. No. And participant observant roles in people's movements. Dr. Yadika is a member of SOES Law Environment and Development Center. It's called LEDC. He serves as an assistant editor for the lead journal and member secretary of the People's Commission on Kosi River Basin. He's a fellow at the Institute for Social and Environmental Transition, ISET Nepal, collaborating with the ISET senior advisor, Mr. Ajay Dikshit, who is quite well-known name in transboundary politics between India and Nepal, and also a good friend. With that, I hand over to you, Rahul. You have about 40 minutes to present, and then we will open up for discussion. Thank you.
It's moving. Can I start now? Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Srinivas sir and CPR for providing this opportunity, first of all, that I can share my PhD work, which has been ongoing at a thinking level after submission also and being awarded also. So I think speaking at CPR, particularly under the aegis of trade talks, is one way to reach out to more people who are sharing similar kind of conceptual universe that I've been working on. And I look forward to listen to a lot of comments and queries which follow from the discussion. So today, I'm going to talk about a river that comes from Tibet Autonomous Region of China through Nepal and then enters India. And it enters into India through the state of Bihar, right? So that way it's a transboundary river. And when it enters India, it basically has a very low gradient. It has lost much of the slope, much of the energy, and hence whatever it carries throughout its journey from the Himalayan region, it started depositing it as it descends into the plain. It's basic physical geography that this happens in the later stages of a river's journey. And this fact that it comes from a young fold mountain like Himalayas and loses its gradient and energy basically is the fulcrum around which the behavior of Kosi rotates, right? And this has been the reason of Kosi being a migrating river. most of us know about a river meanders in the plains. It moves like a snake. It does not move in the straight line. But meandering and migrating are different things. A river migrates in the sense it abandons its channel altogether and starts moving in a different direction through a different channel. So we are talking about a river which has weirdness of this scale, that it has moved around 150, more than that, kilometers westwards in last 200 years. So we are going to talk about a river of this character, and then we'll try to see how its natural behavior of migrating and flooding, of course, has been attempted to be controlled through structural interventions, and then how it has backfired, how it has socially, economically, and ecologically, it has transformed the region, and what is the present predicament of life of the people. So what I'm trying to basically do is I'm not going to develop a critique of the embankment as such. I start from that perspective because there is a lot of established literature which says that what's wrong or what is the folly with the embankments. I'm going to basically look for the answer that despite so much of criticism, despite so much of people's frustration, despite so much of accumulated literature, and not only through people outside the government, there is a whole lot of reports from very prestigious apex institutions like NDMA, NIDM, Central Water Commission, National Institute of Hydrology. You name the institution working on water, and they have a critique of embankment. So the curiosity is, why does this policy, first of all, begin with? In what situations? And why does it perpetuate after so much of criticism? It's a logical question that I wanted to answer. Yeah. So I investigate this policy formation and then policy perpetuation or policy inertia, the rigidity of not changing the policy from an anthropological perspective. And for that, it is important to see, first of all, that there is in the popular discourse, aaj bhi, we keep saying that disasters are acts of God. And a very senior leader used this phrase very recently, acts of God. And in the evolution of disaster studies as a discipline also, the initial idea was that there is something which is unavoidable, shocking, which just rips apart the societal structure. That is something called disaster. There is nothing we can do about it as humans. There is very little window we can do anything about that. So it started from that vantage point. And with time, basically by involvement of other disciplines, we have arrived at certain understanding that no, it is not that. It is not an act of God. And there is a lot of human role in that, right? So this is one theoretical perspective through which we are going to see how Kosi floods. So this anthropological lens basically unbundles natural hazards from policy-induced disasters. We have this Kosi flood, but when we unbundle this wholesome phenomenon, then we start looking at what is completely biophysical, what is natural, what is given out there, like a river meandering, and what we have added through our policies, through our reconfiguration of spaces and so on and so forth. So that is what anthropological perspective on disaster attempts to unbundle or disaggregate. Then I take three basically inflection points through which I try to argue my point, and that is before policy, there is a framing of an issue. It is framed in certain way that paves the path of how technocracy or whatever agency will intervene. It also decides which agency will intervene, because that depends on what kind of framing we are giving to the issue. And then we also try to see the thickness of that situation, as in when embankments were decided that, okay, we are going to control the river Kosi through embankments. What was the socioeconomic and political thickness of that moment? And after that, despite mounting criticism, why it is being perpetuated. Today also, there is a flood control order, there is standard operating procedure, as if this flood management has been routinized completely. There is nothing shock. There is a machinery which just kicks off every year and maintains those embankments. So why does that happen? That has also been interrogated to some extent. Yeah. So although this kind of binary is not sustainable in social science, but still for simplicity and to just push the point forward, we try to see that there is a traditional view with regard to disasters, and there is an anthropological shift that we see from 1970 onwards. So in the traditional view, it is said to be an act of God or brute luck. Brute luck was a term used by Anderson in 1999. And she says there is something called brute luck and there is called option luck. As in somebody is born differently abled. That is brute luck. We can't do anything about it. But somebody drinks a lot and then drives and then loses a limb. That is option luck. So there's a difference. So disasters were put in the category of brute luck. I'm sorry, there is something, a problem with this Kosi region, it floods. That way, we had to look at the disaster. But anthropological perspective says that no, we cultivate the vulnerability of a region socially. We push certain community to the brink of disaster. We reduce their resilience capacity, coping mechanisms. We increase their vulnerability. And that happens through certain policies that we choose for our society. Uh, Another way to look at it, it is like traditional view says that it is kind of isolated crisis. But anthropological argument is that it is not isolated or momentary. It is neither confined in time nor in space. It is basically a culmination or a rupture which happens after a long process. For instance, suppose Himalayas are having a lot of landslides. So it is not just a momentary thing that is happening. It is the logical culmination of so many things that have been done to Himalayas over decades or over maybe centuries. So anthropological argument is that way, that it's an ongoing process. In this process, it reveals what kind of power dynamics exist in our society. And it also says it's nothing shocking is there about it. It is the result of certain quotidian practices. We do certain things which appear to be normal, like confining the river. Then one fine day, we look at the breach of the embankment. So we pretend to be caught off guard, but it is not that shocking, which how much we pretend to be. It's a it's a culmination which is basically bound to happen. Another way is that uh, it is said that it is an unavoidable event. There is something that is bound to happen, it will happen. So this is how traditionally disasters were seen. On this front also, anthropological perspective says it's not like that. There is human agency in creation of the disaster also, and we also have certain levers when we are going to manage those disasters. We have certain adaptation mechanisms through which we can reduce our vulnerability and we can enhance our resilience. So this is the theoretical perspective that has been deployed to understand Kosi in this case. Sorry. Yeah, so basically a very crude understanding of how framing shapes policy. So there is an idea of politics of problem definition. In this case, we see that colonial state started using this kind of approach, that it starts looking at nature as a problem. The floods become a problem, right? And whenever there is a problem, logical next step is search for a solution. So it breaks down certain very normal events, very natural things. For instance, there is a river in monsoon. There will be more rain in a concentrated period from June to August. Of course, the volumetric flow of the river is bound to increase. It's not rocket science, and then it will spread, right? And it is a historical wisdom, traditional wisdom also, that there should be some space left for the river to spread its wings during the monsoon in case of India. But that is framed as a problem. And then there is a search of a solution. And what comes as a solution, according to that epistemological perspective through which colonial state thought, was control of the river. Right? We have to control the river. We have to create certain barriers between the land and the river. And that's where technocracy creeps in. The task of doing this is handed over to technicist people. Now, where does this ideology or outlook towards nature comes? So I also tried to locate this in the basically the emerging tendency of scientific reductionism. I'll just very simplify this jargon. Scientific reductionism says that anything, it's a system is there, 5 components are there. We can disaggregate the system, pick out one, do something and retrofit that. There is nothing is going to change. It basically dismisses there is organic linkage between parts of the system. It simply says, like an algebra, it says system is sum of the parts. We just add the parts, we create the system. And we can unpack the system again and then do something with that, fit it again. So when you sort of deploy this outlook to the river, what you do, you simply segregate. Okay, sediment is there. We are just going to control the water. We are not going to talk about the sediment. We ignore the biodiversity. Basically, we slice out a segment of the reality. River is a whole, right? It's an organic whole. But what we do, we look at the element of reality which is of our interest only. That is control of water. But that is how that becomes possible, right? We simplify the complexity of the reality itself. So that's how this starts. So what was going to happen basically is that riverine ecology was fragmented, right? So this is what happens, and we will see that in case of Kosi also. Another layer that needs to be understood is that in this process, what you do, you basically hide a violence that has been unleashed actually. What is that violence? That is epistemic violence. What is epistemic violence? People have been living with the river for centuries. And in that process of living with the river, it's no brainer that they must have developed some mechanisms, right? So what are those mechanisms? It relates to housing. How do they construct their houses? What material do they use? In Kosi, we have this floating kind of houses. You dismantle the house, you shift it to some other place in case of floods, again assemble it. It's not normal in other places. So that's how local adaptation works. In agriculture also, what kind of crops will be suitable to that riverine ecology? What can grow in this kind of fluvial ecology where land and water keep dancing in the tango? And then there is a whole culture of boat construction, how to utilize the river, wooden logs coming from the Himalayas, from the Nepal. So basically a whole paraphernalia of cultural practices are there, right? Now I call it a complete episteme. We call it an episteme, a knowledge basis through which a society lives, makes its life possible. Now, when this colonial state came, it started marginalizing those knowledge systems, or in that process, those knowledge system, already existing knowledges started getting marginalized, right? And then you come up with this solution of embanking the river. So that is something that is also a kind of politics, because what is politics? In certain ways, it is also defined. You have certain choices. Whenever there is a choice, there is contestation. And in that situation, politics breeds. Who decides that we are going to choose embankments and not how people have been living? Who gets to decide and why and how? All these are political questions, right? So these are certain frames that should be used. And now, with this theoretical understanding of how anthropology looks at disaster and how knowledge debate is existing behind the crude politics that we see every day. Now let us come to the particular case of Kosi. So it's a river that originates into the Himalayas around 7,000 meters above sea level. It has a catchment area of around 94,000 kilometers square, much of which lies in Nepal and Tibet. And then interesting part which has to be noted is it is one of the heaviest sediment carrying river, of the tune of 100 million meter cube per year. This data is debatable. There are multiple figures which exist in multiple spaces, but I, for one, am using the data that has been calculated by Rajiv Sinha, earth science professor of IIT Kanpur. So he has this rough estimate. And because of that, I'll show some images ahead, that when a river brings a lot of silt load on the plains, it deposits that silt load, then the river cannot flow, it changes its path. So that is what happens. And interestingly, what has happened that in a period between 1720 to 1948, 48 because at that time in 1954, the river was trapped where it was. But prior to that, it had almost shifted westwards 160 kilometers. Those people who know the map of Bihar will understand that it used to flow at the eastern margins of Bihar, near Purnia. But over a period of time, it shifted way beyond the midpoint of Bihar, that is Darbhanga. So it's a huge sway to the river. But when it was flowing near Darbhanga, that is the present place, Supal, it has been embanked. Now it cannot move. So this is the given character of the river. And then we also have to see that this catchment area receives rainfall, 80% of rainfall in a very concentrated period of time. So there is a, if you draw the hydrograph of that region, you will see the the peak happens in a very short period. There is not that it is rainfall is evenly distributed throughout the year. So yeah, this is the Kosi cone of disaster. A retired engineer of Water Resource Department, not engineer, but IAS officer, shared this with me, Gajanan Mishra. And if you, this is basically on the right hand side, if you look at the right hand, most right hand, you see Mahanadi written somewhere. So at one point, the point is that, for simplicity, at one point the river was flowing on the right hand margin of this image. But in 1948, it was flowing on the left hand margin of the image. So entire region has been, of course, the river cannot fly from one location to another. It has swept across this region. So in that process, it has abandoned many channels, which are called paleo channels of Kosi. It has abandoned those channels and adopted new channels. So this has been how Kosi has been moving in this region. And this is just an image which shows there are multiple tributaries which merge together in Nepalese territory. And at that point, it's called Saptakoshi because there are 7 major rivers which contribute to the formation of Kosi. In India, we simply call it Kosi. We don't call it Saptakoshi. Now, if you start, now this is the theoretical perspective we have put into perspective there. And then we have discussed what this river is empirically. And now we start how structures started to be conceptualized. So even before colonial state came into picture, there is literature which says that there was zamindari embankments. Zamindar used to protect their land from the river's inundation using small pieces, small stretches of embankments. But what happened gradually, that suppose I create an embankment, then it pushes the river to other territory. Now that zamindar will also construct embankment to protect his land. So that's how the logic of competitive construction of embankment comes into place. That everybody wants to protect their land. Nobody wants the river. So where the river will flow. So when that started to happen, colonial state then intervened that this absurdity cannot go on. Right? For basically 2 reasons also. Because when the path of the river was constrained with time due to more and more embankments, if it breached, it caused a lot of damage. So the damage compensation had to be given by the state. And also waterlogging led to a lot of waterborne disease. So because of these reasons, state thought it's better to let the river flow. Slowly from other experiences also in other parts of India, they realized that embankments can never be the solution. It is not the way ahead with the river. The idea should be to let the river flow. But in 1953, and before that, we had 1897 Calcutta Flood Conference. In 1928, we had Odisha Flood Committee report. In 1937, we have Patna Flood Conference. In these 3 reports, there was almost unanimity, a consensus that embankments should not be there. But for me today also, it's a puzzle. I was sharing this with Srinivas also one day, that sometime I want to just study the history between 1937 and 54. What exactly happened? That this consensus was overturned. In 1953, this was decided that Kosi will be embanked. Right? So in 54, we have an agreement with Nepal, which was revised in 1966, I think. So what comes under Kosi project that was initiated in 1954, we have a pair of embankments which run parallel to the river. So river cannot spread in its width beyond a point. Then we also have a barrage which regulates the flow of river from Nepal to India. And it has 56 gates. Depending on the flow of the volume of the river, certain amount of gates are opened. It has a gates manual, which is controlled by India, by the way, in Nepalese territory also. Then a canal system was taken out of it. There was Eastern Kosi Main Canal and Western Kosi Main Canal. So a bit of flirting was also done with hydropower production, which never fructified actually. Not only that, this is 1954 Kosi project, embankment, barrage, and canal system. But with time, we have seen more and more structures coming on the river, which further constrain the river. There are multiple stretches which are called Suraksha Bandh, and we have Sikaratta Majari, lower embankment or marginal embankment. We also have Kosi Mahasetu, because in 1934 earthquake, which was very popular, a rail line was disrupted and people had to take a very long distance to cross the river from eastern to western side. So around 2007-8, this Kosi Mahasetu was constructed, inaugurated. It is a part of larger east-west corridor. So it has a very important significance of management of traffic. Now we also have this Bakor Bheja bridge, which is coming on the river, and it is allegedly the longest longest bridge in Asia. So these are brief snapshots of what is happening with the river presently. So more and more embankments have been coming, and that embankment, the newer one, is coming within those embankments, between those two embankments initially constructed. So the idea is that basically river has lesser and lesser room to flow. So what ecological and human costs have been there? So ecologically, it has breached at least 9 major times since its construction, latest in 2024 in Darbhanga. What we also see that since the river cannot spread much, the area under the flood effect, which is called riverside, floods more frequently. There is more intensity of the floods. More sediment deposition is also there. Because if the river is constrained, how it will be able to spread its sediment? So that is the major problem. Outside area, earlier what was happening, if the rainfall was there, that used to drain in the main Kosi channel of the river. Now that cannot happen. That linkage has been disturbed. So there is more water logging on the outer side of the embankments. So that is leading to a lot of pollution issues and contamination of water and waterborne disease also. It also prohibits perennial agriculture in that region. So inside also we see that monsoon crop or paddy is almost gone. People depend generally on the wheat because they are sure, almost sure of the wheat. So what happens when you lose one crop? Logical extension is that there will be huge seasonal outmigration from the region. So colloquially, people will say that if crop fails, we'll go to Delhi, Punjab. And Delhi, Punjab means Telangana also, Mumbai also, Kurukshetra, any place in Delhi, Punjab from that region. So that is how it is transforming. And because of rivers ebbs and flows, village geography is also fragmented. There may be decades in which my land may be underwater or under sediment, agriculture not possible. But to maintain the proprietorship of that land, I have to keep paying lagan to the state on the unproductive land also. So this is something which could not be resolved from that Bengal Alluvion and Diluvian Act so far. And vulnerability of people has increased because of these structures, more transformations are happening. With time, living with flood tradition has also eroded. So now people are in a conundrum. They have lost their skills of living with the river. Of course, they are living with the river. That's why they are there. And they are also not getting fruits of modern development. So that's how they are trapped in that sense. So I'm adding a few pictures here. This is very much the river, and you see very less water and a lot of sediment. So a lot of stretches of the river Kosi will look like this. This is an area within the embankment. Now, these wooden logs have been brought from Himalayas with the floods. People collect them and keep them on near the embankment, let it dry, chop them off, and this serves as a firewood for much part of the year for them because LPG is anyways not available. So you'll see a lot of sandbags, white sandbags on the coast. This this is first week of September this year. I was in Kosi again. You see the river continuously pushing the land, and there is an imminent threat to the very survival of that land. It can be eroded any moment. So you see people just being there, spending some time, and the water resource department is deploying those sandbags to avoid the river, but it is not much time will not be there before it gets eroded. So this is another picture that a small boy is just collecting those small pieces of wood flowing with the river. And these tasks are given to the children because education is anyways not, it's not there in, so they have a lot of time to do those things. This is what I was saying. These are unpacked homes, dismantled homes. This is Lalganj in Supal. Their land is eroded. Now they have nowhere to go. So they just unfolded their homes, took them on a tractor, deposited somewhere where there is dry land. They will again assemble it. So this is how they survive. This is spur of the river. Another structural intervention. I am taking this photo from the embankment looking towards the river. So what they do, another layer of security is added that embankments should not breach. That is priority number one for the state. To further keep the river away from the embankment, a perpendicular structure is created, almost perpendicular, not exactly, that keeps the river away. So first line of defense is spur. If spurs start getting eroded at some point, the WRD becomes very vigilant, deploying a lot of men and material there. Now you see on that spur, there are homes of the people, the parts and of the homes which they have brought here. This has been bulldozed by the revenue department. This has, I have never seen this in last 5 years. So this was height of brutality of this state. It has remained indifferent to the plight of the people. That's what I have seen in 5-7 years. But this was brutality has not been there. I've never seen that people are eroded from their land. They are coming on the spur. They are moving their homes through tractors, and the state is not allowing them to live there. Where should they go? So that is how precarity is constructed. This is another, again, some walls of certain homes are there, and this is community kitchen, which is run by disaster management department. Interestingly, structures are maintained and constructed by WRD, engineering department, water resource department, and whatever precarity it creates is managed by disaster management department. DMD cannot give any feedback to WRD that because of your embankments, we have to do this disaster management. So this community kitchen is there on paper, but it is closed. People are not being given what are they entitled to. Yeah. So this is the situation on the ground ecologically and what socioeconomic transformation have happened in a period of time. Now, the core argument that I wanted to present in this talk is threefold. I just said there are three inflection points on which I focus. First, politics number one is from hazard to calamity, which I underlined when I was talking about theoretical perspective. That first politics happens at the level of framing the issue itself, right? That kind of thing happens at the epistemic level when agenda is set. Now, how do we decipher that? You look at the reports of the colonial administration. I explained biophysically that this river migrates through that Kosi cone of disaster. Now, what metaphors and what language was used for that river? It said that this river Kosi is a promiscuous lady which changes her bed every night, right? And hence, it demands control. So if the problem is caricatured as a feminine, the problem solution has to be masculine. And that's how scientific reductionism works. That's how it looks at things. So masculine or technocratic intervention has to control this promiscuous lady from deviating from a channel. They should flow in a discipline. Just deviating slightly from there. It is not interesting only in the modern episteme. It happens in traditional knowledge also. It is said that when Kosi floods, women of that area go with vermilion or sindoor and they threaten the river that if you don't stop flooding, we will marry you. So marriage is synonymous with controlling or calming down the ferocious energy of that river.
When marrying is controlling men. Okay.
So this is how in traditional knowledge also it was seen that to control the river, you have to marry her. So this is how. In 1953 also, a lot of things changed. State was now post-colonial, independent state, but that idea was similar. There is a film division, short production in 1953. You can see on YouTube. Yeah. So there is a term, riding snake, and it is the way it is framed that it is a whole lot of disaster. There is no survival possible with this river. There is only death and destruction. And then comes the savior of everything, modern engineers, and they just control the river.
Right, Bombay.
Yeah, Roorkee. Roorkee is there. So, and on the one side, this was a state's narrative, how they are explaining the river. And when I interviewed people, 80 years old or 75 years old, which can broadly recollect what was happening at that time, many respondents said that Kosi used to spread over a large area. So the height was not much. And people used to sit on the back of the buffalo and cross the river. So through these experiences, anecdotal experiences, we can think how they used to imagine the river and how a state is trying to explain it. And there is literature also. William Wilcox has written, which has been cited by Dinesh Mishra, that there was a whole cluster of approaches which I've just mentioned, that controlled flooding was there. People knew that bunds can be constructed, but they also knew at what point river should be allowed to flow, at what point we should let the river flow, because then it can cause disaster. So that was also that controlled flooding was also ignored at that time. And people also recollect in their songs and in vernacular literature also, we see in Fanishwar Nath Renu especially, it describes the psyche of the people and experiences of that region, how rich the culture was, and so on and so forth. In songs, they explain how many how many varieties of rice were there. So you often see in any Maithili novel that I've written, there is a whole description of feast in that. That is very central. Now I'm surprised. It's a curiosity that should happen. If the region was so much devastated by the Kosi, as the state claims to be, then how come it has such a thick description of this feast happening in the marriages and explanation of what the diversity of rice and mutton and fishes are there? So one has to think about it. Then colonial calculations were there. It was basically revenue driven. There is a whole lot of literature on that, that why did state was becoming interested in controlling Kosi. Of course, it was garbed in the language of care. I have written a short paper on that also, that it's a strangulated by care. Everybody cares for victims of Kosi. State also care, NGOs also care, everybody cares. So colonial state also wanted to care, but the idea was that was a political economic logic to it. Because in that area, today also we call it Farakiya Zameen. In Todermal's time, it was called that it was outside the revenue calculations. It could not be settled. Land settlement kabhi ho nahi paya. Today also it's challenging. So state was thinking that if we delineate the boundary between land and the river, we can make sure how much agriculture will happen and how much revenue will be there, which is the basis of state formation anywhere, taxation. And then associated to that was 1857 revolt and the whole thinking that was going on, the challenges of governmentality, so on and so forth. So that logic, these multiple logics were compelling a state to control the river and develop modern infrastructure, roads, bridges. Anything can come up after the river is controlled, right? So this was also there, but in this whole process, this political economic logic has to be justified. That's where the role of experts has been investigated by me a bit in politics of knowledge. This confidence was given by, this audacity was given by a possibilist outlook. In human geography, you study this, that there was naturalism, there was environmental determinism, and then came the ideology of possibilism. Humans became more confident, more masculine, more powerful, and control the nature. So that ideology was there, and coupled with that was scientific reductionism, which says that we can figure out a small slice of reality and change it. So now the idea of visualizing rivers as webs is coming. Jayanto Bandyopadhyay has said that we should visualize river as webs, water, energy, biodiversity, and sediment. It's not just water. So, and all of these have organic linkages within them. So we cannot disturb one without disturbing the other. Now, this was how this agenda was set in politics one, that we are going to do something with the river. And when we finally made the choice, I mentioned three junctures: 97 report, 1897, 1930, 28, 1937. Then why did this consensus change? The contingent arguments which I could understand, one was that in 1954, where the river was flowing at that time, it had big zamindaris on either side. On one side, it was Purnia zamindari. On this side, it was Maharaj Raj of Darbhanga. So it was in interest of both the zamindars that river should not move now. Let it remain where it is. So one demand was coming from that, from landlord's end. Now this was fitting in and feeding into post-colonial sentiment of Indian state. When Nehru was saying temples of modern India, dams are temples of modern India. So that cultural and legitimacy comes from there, that you can develop big infrastructures. Grounds say there was a voice that landlords' interests were to be protected. State's need was there because in a multinational state, there is not one nationality in India. Of course, it's a kind of leftist argument to make. Only 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Well, yeah.
Okay. So in that case, we have to figure out one logic of how to form the state and nation. So development becomes one. So in that case, impulse of nation building was fused with development as a national unifier. Then that area was the catchment area of socialist leaders. So Congress had to make inroads. I'm just giving a touching different kind of arguments that could possibly explain. And then these were pushes that were propelling that construction of embankment can be there. But what happens in 1953? Then I borrow this idea of Naomi Klein, Canadian novelist. She says in her book Disaster Capitalism that there are moments of disorientation. In 1953 floods, Nehru takes the aerial review of that area and says something should be done. This something should be done, the will to improve, that was always there. And Klein says that in moments of disorientation, state pushes those ideas which were in the air all the time. It was not fructified, but it just captures that moment and pushes ahead with that idea because there can be very less resistance at that time. Now, we have discussed how it was framed, how it was chosen that, okay, we will go ahead with that. And then still one question remains. Okay, you constructed these embankments in 1954, but in 1954, September, Gulzari Lal Nanda, Minister of Planning, says in Lok Sabha that embankments are not the solution. We are just constructing for some time. Ultimately, we have to live with the river. Then naturally, why it was not phased out? Forget about phasing out. You keep constructing more embankments. How to justify that? So this, I think, is some novelty that I could contribute, of course, subject to criticism from the field. So these are 4 or 5 arguments that I think explains why policy does not change. One is the political economy of earthwork. If you look at Bihar's economy, agriculture is on decline, negligible industries, service sector is not there, migration driven remittance economy. So what is there for the loot is public money, and public money is rotated through earthwork. This is the argument of Arvind Narayan Das in his book Republic of Bihar. So the thekedari becomes so important. A thekedar wants thekedari to become a politician, and a politician wants thekedari to continue his electoral machine. So that becomes very, very important. That nexus of engineers, politicians, and contractors feeding into each other, right? So that does not allow policy to change so easily. Then, of course, what we have been discussing so far is epistemic dominance of hydraulic departments like Water Resource, Central Water Commission, Ganga Flood Control Commission. That ideological hegemony is yet to be challenged. I'm adding to that from the field that it is not that there is a dichotomy between state and the community. State just pushes for embankments, community says river should flow. No, there is a very deep constituency in the riverine community also which demands embankments. I cannot go much deeper into that because we have paucity of time, but now people think that embankments are there and whatever possibility of good life is there, it is possible outside the embankment. So let's focus on getting some money, purchasing a piece of land and settling outside. So that alienation which Marx was talking about, alienated from nature, I think that has completed itself, at least in case of Kosi. Then we have this, how the state marginalize these people. It marginalizes them by saying that these are relief core people. They don't want to work. NGOs gives them a lot. These civil society comes and then also distributes freebies. State spends a lot. Of course, there is a lot of leakage in that. So this image has been made that there is a lot of bumper cropping inside embankments, but they don't want to work. They want to depend on freebies. So they lose that moral uh, position that we are victims, adding insult to the injury. Many engineers and administrators said in their interview, when I said why they are there, they says they are living in the wrong place. They should not be there. It is the space is for river to flow. By their logic, rehabilitation colonies are there. They should live there. And फिर वो क्या कहेंगे? Now, if there is corruption in that, it's not our problem. Make it more efficient. So they have their full logic. Very importantly, then one thinks, are social movements active in that region? Yes, they are, but they are very weak. That demands a separate talk to explain why they are weak. It has geographical compulsions. It's tough to mobilize that community because of geography. It has internal fragmentation too. There are very deep constituencies which demand this thekedari and construction of embankments. So whom do you mobilize in that case? And for what purpose? Democratically, what is in our hand? To damage the electoral chances of a leader, right? But Kosi flows in a linear pattern, in a curve. And you have different Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha constituencies all along the Kosi. So no single constituency can be decisively affecting the fate of any political leader. They don't have that capacity. I have written record of so many leaders saying on record in full public view that we don't need 10,000 vote of Kosi people. I can win by the vote of people who are living outside the embankment. So there also. So these are 5 6 factors which sort of makes the case very helpless. As in they are not able to affect expertise, challenge the can question the expert's opinion. Democratically, they are not able to affect. They are morally also marginalized. They are relief core people living in wrong place. So in that condition, they just make life possible through seasonal migration. This is what I have observed. So finally, emanating from all these are certain things that should happen. First of all, this plurality of knowledge, or what Shiv Vishwanathan says, epistemic justice should happen. There is a lot that traditional knowledge has to offer. Today also, if some child drowns in the river, NDRF is there, but NDRF does not know the complexities of the river Kosi. In that case, they hire local Gotakhors or the people belonging from certain Mallah community because they know the river better. So that should be institutionalized. How people of Kosi can contribute to policy making, there should be institutional channels for that. Then government should follow its own reports of focusing on non-structural solutions. Floodplain zoning is there. Then construction of a small TILA is there. Reducing the vulnerability. There are so many things in the reports of uh, 1986, I think. Then there are Rashtriya Baad Ayog report. So many reports already exist which have elaborated how alternative management of flood can be done. Then much focus should be on drainage congestion. Remove that. And how to manage the sediment, because that is the culprit. It is not leaving. Sir talked about Farakka also. In 2024, October first week, this was the condition. Farakka was choked, Ganga was flooding, up Kosi is also flooding. Where does that water go? Kosi merges in Ganga in Katihar and then flows through and flows ahead in Bengal and then Bangladesh. If Farakka is choked, where does that water go? So, on a large scale, hydrologically looking, sediment management and drainage congestion should be the focus. I think that's pretty much, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you, Rahul. That was brilliant. And also, I think uh, the depth of politics that you could unpack out of Kosi River is just unfathomable, particularly because I have tried to sort of understand some part of it, but then I think even though Rahul says that there is actually plenty of body of work, I don't think there is adequate amount of critical examination of some of these politics that perpetuates these conditions there.
Engineering critique is there.
Engineering critique, being an engineer, he says that there is not adequate engineering critique. I mean, you have got another engineer saying that agree to disagree kind of situation here, but you need to, some other non-engineer had to come to say that, okay, you don't have to, or otherwise you do need to do engineering critique. But, I think that is where my problem, part of it is also. I think I've got plenty of issues that I want to sort of debate about, but I don't think I should take much of the time. But are there any questions? But before that, there are a couple of observations. I think you could take it as questions. One is related to the methodological approach. I mean, you do say anthropology of obviously space is what you could say. And there is another one is about the framing itself, the broader framing. The first one is about, you keep mentioning state as a kind of monolith. I mean, this is what happens often, and state looks for, you have used Naomi Klein's moment of disorientation to advance certain kind of strategies or otherwise approaches. Now, I'm not sure that would really help us, partly because state itself, I mean, if you look at it, it's an abstract idea. I mean, it's a kind of construction, abstract construction, and it is produced by a certain kind of social contract. And state itself has this very fragmented and amorphous interests. Very often, part of it is also because we treat it as monolith, we don't appreciate the kind of contestation that happens within the state spaces. And then it is because of these failures are the moments that you say certain kind of interests try to co-opt or otherwise sabotage certain plans. I mean, as you said about Nehru saying that something needs to be done. And then there are this play of interests that are coming in. And then eventually, despite the fact that you mentioned that embankments was actually critiqued and then criticized for long by the literature as well as the policymakers and even engineers, they were part of it, saying that they were not the solution. In fact, KL Rao himself said that it was, when he recommended that the embankments is just a solution, temporary solution, because they just didn't have a clue about how to deal with it. And then eventually that position of building embankments eventually won over the rest of them because something has to be done. That's a moment of disorientation. So, in your view, given the fact that certain kind of unpacking of those spaces that you have done and the politics that you have done from various perspectives, how about unpacking the state itself? That is one. And do you see the potential of some level of deeper understanding towards making better interventions if you do that? I'm not saying that you should. I'm saying whether you agree with it or not. That is one. The second is about the framing itself. You keep saying that people there, and this is to provoke you actually, are alienated from nature all the time by these strategies that come from elsewhere, externally. Aren't we all alienated by the project of development? We are sitting here, we don't know what is the kind of impact that we're producing on the environment and natural resources. Who's alienated? For whom? At what cost? Do these things came into your inquiry? Just out of curiosity, as I said, it's only provocation. So with these two questions, and then after that, we will take other questions that are there in the Q&A. But please.
Can I address
Yes,
this?
sure.
Yeah, so of course, this is what colonial states conundrum was. I I mean, we'll talk why this image went that of state is not a monolith. I go by Akhil Gupta's argument of red tape that there's not Hobbesian state, there are Foucauldian structure of power and so on and so forth. In colonial state, this debate was there. The revenue department was hell-bent that embankment should be there because it was in their interest. Ki if river is tapped, revenue will be consolidated. But water resource department was trying to add sanity to the rampant and mad construction of embankment. And then we see that, and we explain that through this state not being a monolith and abstract idea. In my case, in Kosi, I did not see that. Of course, at an abstract level, we can say that we surely know that a state should be studied ethnographically and there is no single consensus and everybody just follows that. But in case of Kosi, this whole package of constructing embankments, maintaining them, and doing disaster relief operations, they can together be construed as a monolith, which does not change. Internal contestation also, I have not seen. Nobody basically is, I think there is a unity of understanding that if water resource department keeps pushing for embankment, it will keep the machine of disaster operations churning, and from that money can be extracted out. So it is a win-win situation for everybody, that nexus of technocrats, politicians, and engineers. So everybody has some stake in that. So state, of course, I don't have that theoretical standpoint that the state is a monolith for sure. Yeah, you talked about people. The question was,
And that's alienation.
yeah,
The framing.
why I am saying that. I am saying that I mentioned in the beginning that the Marxist approach of talking about development intervention and critique is that there is a malign state and there is a benign community. You just, and also my own understanding by engaging in people's movement, their parcha, pamphlets, their whatever arguments they give, whatever speeches they give. For instance, there is a very famous that flows from Narmada Bachao Andolon itself, that नदियों को अविरल रहने दो, नदियों को अविरल बहने दो, नदियों को निर्मल रहने दो. My question is that is it people's voice or is it people's movement's voice? I tried to see that in case of Kosi. And 22nd January, I was talking to Evi before this talk. On 22nd January 2025, I was sitting well within the embankment in a village, and a lady said, या तो सरकार हम लोगों को पुनर्वास में भेज दे या अपनी नदी को जहां ले जाना है ले जाए.
पुनर्वास.
रिहैबिलिटेशन. या अपनी नदी को जहां ले जाना है ले जाए. So I lived in that area for more than 2 years. I did not see that cultural engagement with the river or ethics of care or whatever. Now we can explain that why that is happening. Why I said that, just to pose a critique of this people's movement's voice, that people are against embankment. If people are so against the embankment, where is that demand coming from? So I met with multiple people's movement alternative, which said that we need embankment from this village to this village. By that logic, 1,000 homes will be safeguarded. So that image that somebody is thinking about pan Kosi level is not there. Everybody has their particular local interest. I'm not trying to say that people are evil or selfish, but you don't deliberately impose a burden of morality on them that you have to think about the river. Their children are collecting wood in the river. Their men are outside in Bombay, in Haryana, earning 10,000 rupees a month, working 14 hours a day. And their women are in the village carrying children in the times of flood, menstruating women, and having water up to their chest. How do they live? In that condition, I saw people are not saying that we have to protect the river or whatever. The point is that it is just to, again, provoke a debate that we have to move ahead with this idea. What Amitabh Aviskar also says it in The Belly of the River, in her ethnography of Anjanwara village, that aisa kuch nahi hai that tribals are God sent caretakers of nature. It depends on their material association. Contingent hai wo. If they are not being fed by the river, they will do something about it. And I think that's where this key lock mechanism happens. That's where this state, under the garb of democracy, says that it is people's demand. People are demanding embankment. So there is a lot of heterogeneity within the community. As the state is amorphous, so is the community. It is a lot of internal fragmentation within itself. So in that case, community also uses the state to its own benefit. A state also uses community. How does it use? It has Anganwadi Sevikas, government teachers, who dilute the dissent at the ground level. It breaks the community. It has institutional mechanisms. Delimitation of constituencies will be done in such a way that nobody is important anybody. They can be just sacrificed. So that's what.
Okay. So anyway, I think you didn't see it, the state as a monolith, but at the same time, state pushing this project of building embankments, certain kind of a disconnect out there. Partly because, let me tell you my dilemma. You see, Jawaharlal Nehru said that something has to be done because there are these floods that are happening in Bihar. Now, if the solution, there is a large chunk of people who said that embankments is not a solution at that time too, including engineers. But eventually it ended up becoming a solution. How did it happen? Which forces advanced it? What kind of gaps are there in the knowledge? I think that is what I'm interested in partly. There's another level of state level disconnect. Again, multi-scalar. The first report that formally critiqued the strategy of having embankments was by Planning Commission. You know that we discussed about it. Planning Commission said that it was absolutely ridiculous idea to build embankments almost after 20 years. And there was still there is an evaluation report. Yet, within the state spaces and within the contestations that were happening between federal government and state government, of whichever reasons, I have a theory, but I don't want to impose on it. But how did that important report got, or perspective that they are not as in a long-term solution, got lost? That's what I meant when I say that we need to break the state machinery and see what are the forces that are gaining to advance certain kind of projects. But you don't have to respond that part. But let's come back to any questions around the table. Then we can go to the yes, Evie. Can we have a mic? Yeah, it's done. It's good enough.
Hi, thank you, Rahul, for that wonderful presentation. So, continuing a little bit on what Srinivas sir said, you could also look at Nitul Borwa's work on the Majuli embankments. He talks about the practices of everyday state. He also goes into this dialogue of how the state is not a monolith, and through unpacking of the everyday practices of the state, you could understand these interactions between community and the state. And secondly, I just wanted to ask you to go a little deeper into how you looked at the community and how they look at amendments right now. Like, if you noticed a difference between opinions between the young people, how they look at amendments, or like the older generation, how they look at the river and the amendment process.
Yeah. So yeah, they should have.
You want to respond to one question, or you want to collect?
I can take more questions.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay.
Yeah. So this is the river, and these are the embankments that flow with them. So initially, I had this conventional idea that I'll pick some village, do deep ethnography into that, and then write my thesis. But when I started moving in the field and listening to people, what they're trying to say, I just understood that depending on where they are located, upstream or downstream with respect to one structure, or inside or outside with respect to embankment, that significantly governs their opinion. Right? One thing. So people who are located on the just within the embankment, they have a possibility to see that, okay, Maybe if some embankment is constructed, we can come outside. Everybody wants to fall outside the embankment because that is safeguarded area. So there is a possibility for them to demand embankment. So they will do it. Imagine a village that is located centrally between the embankments. No amount of embankment can save their village and make them fall outside the embankment. So they will not advocate for embankments. So this is how there is a difference. Now, what do they do? They suggest even a more provocative suggestion that is called canalization of the river Kosi. कोसी को नहर बना दीजिए. उनका कहना ये है, and they are very crude and rude in saying that. They say at barrage river is flowing in 2 kilometers. At Kosi Mahasetu it is flowing in also in 1.2 kilometers, something like that. So if you have compressed river at multiple points in 1 or 2 kilometers, let's do it entirely. From barrage to Kursela where it meets Ganga. Whatever cost is there, they have also suggestion for that. They are saying every year you expend hundreds of crores for maintenance of embankment and for disaster relief operations. Just push all that money into this and use steel girders to canalize the river. Now they are also saying whatever land will be going into that, some land will be trapped into that. They are saying we are ready to sacrifice that land, provided we get one kattha of land outside. So I think this is not a logical suggestion. This is out of desperation they are trying to say. They are done that there is not going to be school and hospital within embankments. We have to purchase our own land outside. Our agriculture is in shambles. So they are demanding that. One. Second, very quickly, 80-year-old people still have some nostalgia. Embankment nahi tha to aisa tha, waisa tha. But 20 years old students or boys simply want a good life and they look outside. They think that there is not much which can be achieved through struggles. I'm not trying to send a hopeless picture, but a huge revolutionary consciousness does not exist. At least I have not seen that. They think that we will go outside and then come back, purchase some land, settle outside. So their expectation from the state is very piecemeal. They think that only state should give when there is flood, thoda bahut rahat mil jaye. Other than that, they don't have a sustained long-term expectation from the state. So this is how community is changing.
I think this is not just with Bihar. So if you look, I'm a lawyer. I'm engaged with a lot of this environmental issues of late. I've just joined a law firm. In fact, we founded one, and we've this problem with humanitarian with our lot is everywhere. So it's not just the Kosi flowing into Bihar; it's also the Kosi flowing in Uttarakhand. It's also the Ganga flowing in Uttarakhand. Anybody who comes around it and along with it comes with a lot of ifs and buts, right? 10 people will say you can build embankments. 10 people will say, no, you don't build embankments. Then others will come in and they'll say, oh no, we have this much amount of sediment coming in and we can later on mine this and we can give so much money around, and there's this huge, and at the end of it, we were at the NGT and the NGT was asking us, they say, what is the solution? And we were as clueless and as helpless as anybody around us or even the experts, because everybody is so entangled in whatever needs they have.
Yeah.
Right? A person who just wants his child to go to school, right, cannot send his child to school because the river has destroyed everything infrastructure. There was whatever is left, right? However, the contractor who wants the river to flood because there'll be a lot of sediment coming in for him, he doesn't want any embankments. So these are the realities on the ground. Do you have a comment?
No, you did
Yeah,
not
just-
ask the question.
Just a,
Yeah, yeah.
I was just an observation
Yeah,
that I'm just putting out.
100%.
Okay, we can pick up a couple of questions from Zoom. One is from Ananya Samazdar. Wonderful presentation. What are some of the suggested measures and mechanisms for increasing participation and stakeholdership of the members of the community in comprehensive disaster management related to Kosi floods?
I think right now people don't have any channel of communication. At many a times I have seen MPs and MLAs. I've interviewed 5 or 7 of them who belong to that area. They very clearly say that there is nothing we can do about it. So in that way, that's what I try to say. The dominance of technicist wing of the state, even the popularly elected people of the that are representative of the people, elected representative, they don't have any interface as in how to change the quotidian practices of WRD. They can raise demand for new structures. That, for instance, Kosi Mechi interlinking project is coming, but they have very little intervention. That scope of intervention is very less to do that. So first of all, state should, I mean, make some institutional arrangement wherein it at least invites, if not people, then at least people's movement representatives and civil society which is working in that area. And also, it should, for instance, you have this flood warning thing. That flood forecast is the solution. If we give information to the people, they will go to safer area. These are absurd things. I told that when I forget the name who was presenting that day, Patna Promenade. An architect was there,
Yeah, Nitish.
Nitish. So that day I also said that this approach of flood forecasting is not translated on the ground. So there is a problem of transmission of knowledge. So that thing at least can be picked from the ground. Abhi jo policy has been made, it is just replicated. It's a routinization that is happening. There is no fresh rethinking happening. And whatever thinking happens, it's very superficial. So state has to make honest attempts. Okay, I'll think how it can be architectured and institutionalized.
Okay. I have more questions from online, but since Kapoorji has to exercise his right, please. Please, questions, sir. Kapoor sir.
Sir, please allow me to speak in Hindi if you don't mind.
No, not
But
at all,
I-
but
because
not
I
more
feel-
than a minute.
Because I feel, I'll be very short, sir, very short. I will only make a point that I have in my mind. I got a good, study of the subject, the floods and the people. I'm talking floods and the people. Floods will always be there, number one. This severity, ये कितने भयानक होंगे, उसके जो मैग्नीट्यूड है, वो उस पर हम कम और ज्यादा कर सकते हैं. उसके वो कैसे कर सकते हैं और लोगों को जो अफेक्ट आता है उसको कैसे हम फ्लड्स के इम्पैक्ट को कम करें और लोगों को रिलीफ कैसे दें. ये दिस इज माय पॉइंट सर. दिस इज द बेसिक क्वेश्चन फॉर मी. तो उसके लिए मैं ये आपको प्रपोज करता हूँ. मेरी लिमिटेशंस हैं, मैं लिमिटेशंस में बोल रहा हूँ. पहली बात तो ये है कि वोट बैंक पॉलिटिक्स जो इसमें प्ले की जाती है उसके ऊपर ध्यान देने की जरूरत है. नंबर 2, जो पैसा फंड्स सेंटर रिलीज करता है, अगर हम चाहते हैं कि हम फ्लड्स की सिवियरिटी को कम कर दें, अगर उसकी मैनेजमेंट, फंड्स की मैनेजमेंट किसी और एजेंसी को दे दीजिए बजाय कि स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को. दैट इज मीन और सम मिनिस्ट्री और डिपार्टमेंट हेडेड बाय a retired Supreme Court, the Chief Justice or Justice, right? अगर
Kapoor sir,
फंड
Kapoor sir, सवाल.
फंड चल जाते हैं.
सवाल, please. नहीं,
सवाल मेरा सवाल सर. We should to tackle the subject, one point should also be considered. What do we do with the funds released by the center? Where should it go? Who should manage it? Thank you.
I'll take the question out of that, what you said. आपने शुरू में एक बात की, मैं हिंदी में बोलता हूँ, इफेक्ट कैसे कम किया जाए और रिलीफ कैसे दिया जाए. वही मैं कहना चाह रहा था श्रीनिवास सर के सवाल पे कि राज्य को ईमानदारी से लोगों के पास जाने की जरूरत है और ये देखना जरूरी है कि लोग बाढ़ को कैसे समझ रहे हैं. आई रोट अ शॉर्ट पीस कुछ दिन पहले. आई मेट अ लेडी हु इज 65-70 ईयर्स ओल्ड. मैंने उनसे पूछा, मेरे पास एक ब्रॉड क्वेश्चन आया था, मैंने उनसे पूछा कि इस बार बहुत ज्यादा पानी आया कोसी में 24 में, कि आपको पता था कि 7 लाख क्यूसेक पानी आने वाला है? बोले हाँ पता था. हमने कौन बताया? बोले मुखिया का भी फोन आया था, जो मुखिया हारा उसका भी फोन आया था, कई लोगों ने बताया. तो मैंने बोला कि फिर आपने क्या किया? बोला हम क्या कर देते हो जान के कि 7 लाख क्यूसेक पानी आएगा, हम क्या करें उसका? हमको कोई ये बताए कि 7 लाख पानी आएगा तो मेरे घर का कितना हिस्सा डूबेगा, मेरा गाय का जो नाद रखा हुआ है भूसा वाला वो डूबेगा, छप्पर डूबेगा, क्या डूबेगा? पहली बात कि ट्रांसलेशन ऑफ दैट नॉलेज इनटू पीपल्स एक्सपीरियंस फर्स्ट। सेकंड, इवन इफ आई नो मेरा कितना घर डूबेगा, वेयर शुड आई गो? State simply say that evacuate, but where? Suppose I settle on the embankment, that demands travel of boat. Boats are not there. A state is supposed to provide free of cost boat. That is in standard operating procedure of disaster management department, but it is not there. Private boats, वो खुद की जान बचाएंगे कि आपकी जान बचाएंगे? There is no electricity at that point. So first thing is that a state has to honestly fine tune its policy based on the grounded knowledge. First thing first. And then it's very basics of honest policy execution. SOP, if you look at DMD SOP, Disaster Management Department, it's amazing. It's like it's a nanny state. It is taking so much of care of its people. The point is to honestly implement it. You won't believe there is provision of providing folic acid tablet to women also. But what is actually provided? That 8 by 8 feet का एक प्लास्टिक देंगे और 2 किलो चूड़ा देंगे. That is poha. This is what people get generally. So it's basically, very basically, it's about honest implementation of your own policies. Relief के sense में बोल रहा है मैं. But about the larger issues that we have already talked about.
Sir, sir.
और honestly है कहाँ?
Hmm.
बात तो from to
So we have another question, while besides many appreciations. Okay, yes, Pushpaji has a question after the anonymous questions, but a bunch of good questions. So how do you see climate change, more extreme rainfall and shifting rivers intersecting with the politics of Kosi flood governance? Perhaps they missed the talk, it looks like. But the second one is, what role do India, Nepal, and China play in shaping the flood management in the Kosi Basin? The third question is, do the Indian central government and Bihar state government view and address Kosi floods differently? Very sensitive question.
Third question.
Do the Indian central government and Bihar state government view and address Kosi floods differently? Do they view it differently?
So climate change, की जहाँ तक बात है, there is literature which is coming and it is being very clearly said the intensity of climate change and its impacts in Himalayas will be more than what happens in the average across the globe. So this is being established using data analysis. It is also being said, for instance, I think Rajiv Sinha has written a paper very recently which says we also have to see how much volumetric change in water discharge and sediment happens in each of its tributaries. किस ट्रिब्यूटरी में किस तरह का चेंज आएगा, दैट हैज टू बी आल्सो अंडरस्टूड, दैट विल डिटरमाइन कि डाउनस्ट्रीम में कैसा चेंज आएगा. सो दिस स्टडी इज हैपनिंग रिगार्डिंग विजिबल इम्पैक्ट्स. कोसी में एक कहावत है बहुत पहले से कि दुर्गा पूजा का ढोल जैसे बजता है कोसी भाग जाती है, इट रिसीड्स. सो बेसिकली इट्स अ कल्चरल मेजरमेंट that people know कि okay Durga Puja started, so Kosi will be receding, अब flood नहीं आएगा. Accordingly they will make their plans. But in 2021 October, after Durga Puja, Kosi flooded, and people using their traditional wisdom had kept paddy harvested और bundle बना के in the field also with an assumption कि अब तो दुर्गा पूजा का ढोल बज गया, कोसी नहीं आएगी. But Kosi came after that, and in that year that park mitti we call it, that gets deposited on the sand, on the paddy, and it just ruined the paddy. I still have photos for that. And in that year nobody was ready to purchase, even after multiple, we call it downy in our area, 3-4 times the farmers were doing the downy of paddy, still the park mitti was there. So this gives a window to see that why this is happening. पहले भी ऐसा नहीं है कि पहले सीजन के बाहर फ्लड नहीं आता था, लेकिन to say that climate change is a major culprit or a force to reckon with in Kosi, I don't think it's high time to say that. But we have to remain alert. Second, you said India, Nepal, and China. I don't think China has any governance interference in that, and whatever is there, Indo-Nepal Treaty is there, agreement is there, revised agreement of 1966, I think. So that broadly governs. Much uh, autonomy is in India's hand, and that's a problem basically. That even in the territory of Nepal, embankment maintenance has to be done by India, and thus communication is very difficult. Listening is very difficult, and that's what happened probably in 2008 case also. That there's a paper in EPW which says that institutional dysfunction led to this catastrophe of 2008 Kusaha tragedy, because there was information that there is a weakness at that point, but it could not get communicated and acted upon within time because institutional flow of information is very complicated. So I think that is one thing which should be considered. And there is endless talk for last 150 years about Kosi High Dam, and India keeps saying that India is raising this demand of Kosi High Dam. Nepal is not agreeing. But talking beyond the national interest, imagining a high dam in Barak Kshetra is very disastrous because of seismicity, landslide, in a young fold mountain Himalayas. So a lot of submergence will be there. Why would Nepal agree with that? So these things are there. And last, no, it deals with Kosi flood as it deals with any other flood, I think.
Between the difference between the way central and state governments.
Okay, yeah. So floods in that case fall in the state list basically. Concurrent list maybe thoda sa part hai, but basically it's a responsibility of the state government under India's federalism. What center can do is just to send some broader guidelines, but states are not. It's not mandatory for states to follow them, and that's also, I think, one of the areas which creates some kind of resistance to change any. There are reports prepared by central agencies, but state just carries on with its own approach. And since it is a state subject, what can center is just give some advisory guidance, and in all those there are very nice things that have been said, that embankment should not be there, and then there should be non-structural solutions, how to reduce people's vulnerability. But states just carry on with that. That's what I think happening.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I learned about Kosi that I didn't know that it has changed course so much, 200 kilometers. So it was very important learning for me. But I would like to go a little bit broader beyond Kosi, because so many rivers get flooded in India. And it happens all the time. And Shubham and I at the moment are writing a piece on flooding in Bijnor district where we are working on a small town called Dhampur. And it gets flooded every year, every 3 years, 2 years. So we know we are getting flooded. Living with the floods is one option, managing floods. But in this day and age, when there is so much knowledge available on climate change, predictable pattern of rains, early warning, why aren't we designing appropriate mitigation measures that we don't have floods? So what prevents us from doing it? It's a bigger question. But a smaller comment is, I think like P. Sainath, everybody loves a drought. You should write a book. Everybody loves a flood. So that's just a comment. Thank you.
Quite a title as well.
Yeah.
Everybody loves the floods.
Yeah.
Not everybody.
So
Not everybody.
you basically are asking that despite so much of knowledge available and data that we can make evidence-based policies, why we are not developing mitigation measures?
Stronger mitigation.
That floods are not there. I think it's just a.
You should share your thoughts about it. So
I mean, I think it's very basic that that's where we started our discussion from. That floods are a part of the river. If rivers are there, there will be floods because they receive rainfall, and the volume of river is not constant. What is flood basically? That suppose 1,000 meter cube water is flowing in the river, then there is a rain in 2 months, volume expands to 2,000 meter cube, river expands. That is called flooding. The problem is with the human habitation. We start settling in that area. Forget about this Netherlands concept of giving room to the river. In Hindu scriptures also, I was attending an indigenous knowledge talk on floods. It has very detailed and meticulous suggestions. As in, today we have blue line, red line, zoning of floodplain. That up to this much distance, only agriculture should be there. Up to this much distance, building should not be there. And beyond this, any thing can be there. So there are green, red, and blue lines. These were there in Hindu scriptures also. I'm not aware of other religions, but the point is that in alternative knowledge, already existing knowledge, it was there. The idea is that we have started sprawling ourselves into the floodplains. So that is something we have to mitigate. We have to mitigate that people are not living in that area. But the irony is that the built-in infrastructure is very much consolidated now. We cannot revert back from that. So we are in a fix. We cannot give room to the river. People cannot go elsewhere. They are situated there. So whatever we are doing is, I think, what we could do basically.
Okay, next question from Zoom, Mr. Prakash Ji, CJ. I'm surprised why you did not mention about the natural drainage channels, better known as dhars. These were known to be best drainage system that gradually became defunct because of the barrage. Is that true?
No, I did not mention the term dhar. I mentioned the term paleo channels. That is called in Hindi charan dharaएं. So charan dharaएं, that's what I mentioned. Because earlier people, there were different channels of Kosi, which was abandoned, but used to get reactivated in certain times. What happened in 2008 also, Kosi breached the embankment and adopted it one of its old channels. So yeah, this has happened. And since we have embanked the river, now there is no possibility of river going to those Charamdhara, paleo channels. But yes, this is one of the suggestions that is often made. And 2008 also, there was a constituency which was saying that don't plug this embankment now. जो पानी वहां से निकल रहा है, let it flow. Let that Charamdhara also drain some water. But at that time, one of the political leaders who was in opposition at that time in Bihar, today also he is in opposition. He said, "Ki if Nitish Kumar is not able to do that,
1950 से 2000?
no, I'm talking about 2008. He said, if Nitish Kumar के बस की बात नहीं है, I'll send railway coaches to plug the embankment."
नहीं वो तो ठीक है. चलो,
The point is that paleo channels को rejuvenate करना is an active suggestion that is happening. But how to do that, we have to do more research.
So tell me something. Since you are a civil engineer yourself from IIT Bombay, when you design a barrage as a civil engineer, do you not look at existing drainage channels? I forgot. I mean,
It's been 11 years since I did.
no, it's been several years since I studied civil engineering. That's why I'm asking the question. Don't you? I know for sure that actually civil engineers, it's fairly adequately scientific. It's not, maybe you would have issues with the reductionism and other kind of issues, but the civil engineering itself is a science that developed through learning from mistakes. So I know for sure that first the drainage channels are studied, and then these structures are built. Why would they ignore that?
I'll have to look into this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next question is, do different caste groups face different impacts from floods? Did you observe anything?
Yes,
Interesting.
it's very basic that it's basic sociology that whatever impact is there, it's basically the coping mechanism. Now let me take the case of Musahar caste, which is one of the most marginalized and oppressed caste and depressed caste in case of Bihar. They don't have their land. Forget about their land being in water or under sediment. Other castes have their land in sediment or water occasionally. Musahars never had land. They always settled on somebody else's land, which was they allowed to settle. Now they are just living on the embankments, on the roads. I've sat with them, hundreds of them, and done big meetings with them, also focus group discussions and meetings. And there basically cushion is not there. Caste provides a cushion in that area. For instance, a Musahar person will have a Musahar relative. So there, life chances and living conditions cannot be drastically different. But in case of a different middle caste person, if their land is gone or their home is eroded, they can go to their relatives' home and live there for some months or whatever. So this is there. Then of course the leadership belonging to certain dominant caste in that area also, it does not improve the condition of their particular caste, but other caste like very low caste like Dalits, they don't have voice through their leaders. So of course that's basic how Indian democracy functions, and I think that logic is important. Community resilience is one thing that is making life possible in that area. People are not living off states help, they are living because of community resilience, and in case of community resilience, caste matters a lot. In the entire stretch, there were certain surveys which were done by civil society. It said there is very negligible upper caste population to begin with. So yeah, caste matters a lot. But just because that question has been raised, that geographical compulsions of that area dilute the impact of caste. The heat of the caste is reduced in that area. Why? Because there can be a certain moment, sweet moment, in which a middle caste person's land is lost into the river, and nearby a Chamar caste person has the land. So that middle caste person can settle on their land for a while. So this dilutes the caste intensity like in other villages outside.
So, yeah, past. Yes, Shubham.
Fine.
So, does this house belongs to this Musar community or low caste house? Low caste
No,
people?
this was not Musahar's house. As a matter of fact, this particular case. This can happen with anybody.
Anybody?
Yeah. Whoever is in the embankment, they don't have pakka house. They have this kind of kacha house only, which can be dismantled if there is a threat of erosion.
And I also want to understand the shift of Kosi River from east to west. What's the reason behind?
I explained in the beginning itself that it carries a lot of sediment.
But
And
every river does, right?
It carries a lot of sediment. The scale of sediment is huge. And also the slope of that's hardcore geology. Then we can talk about it later if you have time.
There are a couple of these hypotheses anyway. So, but more so because of the sedimentations. There is a process. You need to be a little bit.
You wanted to ask, so she wanted to ask something.
Who wanted to ask? Okay. No, you see, we are already past time, and I've got three
She has been
questions. so
raising
make
her
it-
hand.
Yes.
Can-
Yes.
But ma'am raised a question on the mitigation part. While I'm also working on Kosi from JNU, a PhD scholar, and the NIDM people say there's no mitigation strategy, national mitigation strategy yet. So what they responded while attending their conference, while discussing with them, we do not have a mitigation strategy. So that was the point which I received. And my question was on the India-Nepal relation. We talk about the governance we know very well the agreement is largely the India has a responsibility of managing. But what about the role of Nepal? Because as I was looking into Himalayan ecology, it's a root cause where the deforestation has been beginning, the globes are happening. And sir was also highlighting about the recent study of sedimentation of various tributaries. That will also be a good helpful. So what about the governance part from the Nepal side?
I think the treaty basically says, I'm not going to too much detail of. Yeah.
Sir, if you want, because we need some solutions.
So that should be there. That suggestion keeps coming from people science and everybody who is critiquing that existing policy, that what happens in the upper catchment area, whatever
Yes.
development model, the same kind of developmentality is there also in Nepal. So the kind of land use pattern is changing there. So accordingly, the behavior of river and sediment will change. But unfortunately, in the treaty, the governance is in India's hand. It has to take care of repair and maintenance and everything.
No. Why should Nepal be bothered about India's problems? Please, I mean,
Yeah,
just
very basic.
elaborate your question. I think it's a very valid, interesting question.
because my study is a comparison between the Saptari and Supaul. So the region, yes, it's two districts from Nepal.
Yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
I'm
yes,
familiar.
sir.
Yes.
So it's not only, yes, Bihar is impacting more. There, every time the floods happen on the Bihar side, people are the disaster happened at Bihar, but there are also people on the other side of the border. They are also, it's a transboundary region we are focusing on. So Nepal, there are many other districts or villages are also impacted every time. So it's not just India issue, Nepal people are living on the other side.
I think their relief is not the concern of India. That is Nepalese government concern. Structures.
Listen, the question is, there is a interest for Nepal because their own populations are at risk in the downstream of barrage. It's hardly 15 kilometers, first response. Second thing is that it's a bit of a complicated. 1956 is when we first signed the treaty, and that had certain provisions that were challenged by Nepal. Because it was the Indian government which is supposed to manage the barrage and respond to flood risk. So there was certain politics within Nepal that forced India and Nepal to renegotiate. In fact, Nepal wanted to renegotiate and it was done. Now the way it works is that the moment it was Indian government, so you have basically there is a station out there where Indian engineers are located, and they are supposed to monitor the flood risk in the barrage and manage the barrage. The moment there is any risk, in the sense like there is any breach, they inform the Bihar government. Of course, the central government is also involved through joint arrangements, and the Bihar government basically responds to it, either through contractors or their own engineers. Now, why should Nepal be seriously concerned? At that time, the populations may be less. When the treaty was signed, that's a good question to ask. Why did they not share the responsibility of responding to floods? So one of the things could be that it's just 15 kilometers, and within the 15 kilometers, whatever the flood zone that is there, at that time, the population density must have been less. One. Second, I think you need to also appreciate the kind of relationship that India and Nepal has. They have this porous border, and there is a great deal of dependencies, syndrome, and also there is a certain kind of give and take kind of relationship. So there is some level of trust that played into that role in drafting the provisions. Anyway, so but has it your question have you got the response from it? Do you want to add anything further? Okay. Can I just finish this? We can come back and we'll close with yours, right? So Arif Nizam, how do you see people's evolving knowledge on the floods and river flow in the Kosi as internalization of larger hegemony of scientific hubris of taming of the river, and how people who are secured living outside the embankments, but once a 10-year breach of embankment take away all the gains of embankments? How this two-side reality of security and insecurity dealt by peoples at knowledge level. So how do you see, I think it's a bit of a long sentence, but it is about how do you see your reflections on the evolving knowledge of the communities to respond to this challenge that seems to be getting deteriorated by the kind of arguments that you're putting in.
Arif Bhai is a co-researcher.
Oh, okay.
So I
Good.
think,
Okay, right.
I think
You both are echo each other, I guess.
No,
So
no.
do you want to respond to him?
Not right now.
Okay. You did say enough, I think, during the talk.
I'll
So
talk.
Aniket Mandal, the power asymmetry that exists due to social and political capital and how marginalized communities are more vulnerable. I don't think he finished his question, actually. He didn't type it. So there is one, Shubha Srishti. Do you think migration has also led to epistemic marginalization? People, which basically means people don't see the value in rebuilding their connection with the river. I think that's a brilliant question. Hence, the people's knowledge does not get transferred over generations.
Yeah, what Shubha is saying is her work is on this left behind women in Kosi. So what point she is trying to make actually is looks interesting. This is the first time I'm hearing that. Yes, what I was trying to say, that alienation thing, because the whole focus has been shifted. People don't have much stake. Matlab, they don't have this imagination that they can make a good life here. So whatever erosion of, because if people move their body outside the embankment, and there is a history that people don't want to send their daughters inside the embankment after marriage. कोई शादी नहीं करना चाहता. Everybody has a propensity to move outside by any way, by marriage or jobs or migration in fields. So I think, yeah, it looks intuitive what she's trying to say, that if people migrate and they don't live with the river, because it's an oral transmission of knowledge, and even not oral, it's a practice that you do. Knowledge is a practice. It's not documented. It's not written how you collect the woods. It's not. Many a times I used to see in Kosi that children walk in the river up to their water with up to their chest, and they don't follow a linear path. They follow curvature. Who tells them? But suppose a child does not live in the Kosi like that, let's say for some years, he will forget that knowledge. So I think she has a very valid point that migration leads to
Take
erosion.
this, take this mic.
So my question is like we all discussed about the floods, but another big issue is sorry.
No, it's on, it's on.
It's on. You'll have to just bring it
Closer, closer.
Okay, it's fine now.
Yeah.
We all discussed about the floods in Kochi, but my question is a big issue is what comes after the floods, the aftermath of the floods, like the diseases, the people displaced. So I would like to like your thoughts. Like, do we focus a lot on just saving the people and then we just leave them? They can live their lives, or we just save them?
Yeah, that's very, very important question. What is the afterlife of a flood? Kosi flooded this year on last year on the boundary of September and October, first week, I think. On 28th September, Ajay Dikshit was saying that there is a lot of rain in upper catchment of Kosi and it's going to flood like hell, which it did, 650,000 cusecs. So I went to this to Kosi in December just with an agenda to see the afterlife of flood. So what happens is with floods comes the sediment. Again and again that discussion comes to sediment. So states, although after this DM Act, there is a threefold approach: pre-disaster, during disaster, post-disaster. But again, that fine-tuned understanding of ground. For instance, Pak Mitti entered people's home. Now people could not use, even after the floods receded, sediment was there of 3 feet. That is kichad there, mud like. Now, if you till you clean it, you cannot utilize your chulha. That is again made of wood and mitti. So that kind of one thing is their example. Then people also lose, for instance, their stored grains that used to survive them well after the floods. I have also met old women who have lost the vessel into cattle जिसमें खाना खिलाते हैं, नाद बोलते हैं हम लोग, जिसमें भूसा डाला जाता है. It flowed with the river. Now, how do they nurture their cattle? Also, many a times they lose their documents. In case these are small things, bigger thing. If paddy is lost, their only last resort is wheat. The boai happens in December. But what happened this year? There was a lot of pank mitti which took a lot of time to dry. So till that dries and tractor breaks that soil, the land has to be prepared before sowing of wheat is done. That happened late. So if that happened late 15 days, it is finished. The whole cycle of wheat production got affected. Paddy was lost in the flood. Wheat is lost after the flood. So I think this gives a snapshot of what happens. And of course, disease and etc. is there. There is often we hear about snake bite, people dying because of snake bite.
Well, I think we should conclude because we passed already almost half an hour, right? No, 20 minutes. So thank you very much, Rahul, and I hope that you will continue in this research, which is very important, and I hope that you would start appreciating, I think the whole bunch of questions about why is it that it's not happening? You yourself mentioned that this is the way the protocols are written, this is the way practices are written. Why doesn't state deliver on it? And besides, of course, the local politics and the bunch of politics that you have unpacked through your research. So look forward to your next iteration of research on Kosi as well as your what corner project. I think now you're moving to Uttarakhand, right?
Yeah,
So welcome to present whenever you are back. Thank you.
we have to figure that out.
You'll be looking at Kosi over there as well?
No.
Which one are you looking at?